Welcome, everybody. My name is Michele DeStefano, and I believe we're live. Yeah? So glad to have everybody here with us for this last panel of the day, the capstone panel on the day-to-day challenges of delivering effective legal education online in the midst of the complex environment explored earlier today. What a great day. First, let's just take a moment to celebrate Lily and Hakeem. Great job. What a really thought-provoking day. Our challenge today is to close this session and give you some thoughts on the classroom and effective legal education online. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Michele DeStefano. I'm a professor at the University of Miami School of Law. I'm also guest faculty at Harvard Law School, and I'm the founder of Law Without Walls. And we have with us this wonderful panel. And before we get started introducing them all, which we're going to do, where each of our panelists is going to give us a 3-minute presentation, sort of their passion related to this topic. And before each panelist gives their 3-minute presentation, we are going to do something that we believe could be an example of how to build community and personality and empathy in online. So over the course of the last 10 years, I've done a ton of research and studied a lot of research about lawyers, and there's tons of tests on us. And some of the research on thousands and thousands of lawyers all around the world, most disheartening research I found out was that we don't just test low on empathy compared to other professionals. We just test really, really low on empathy. And that was a problem before, but it's a bigger problem online because you can't see each other's body cues. You don't get to know each other in the same way. You don't experience the room in the same way. So what we're gonna do before each of our presenters present for 3 minutes is we're gonna have a little fun and share a little bit about ourselves. So we're going to share our pet, if we have a pet, our peeve. You know, what is our peeve? And it could be related to anything related to teaching, online education, etc. Or your personal peeve related to your profession, and your motto. So I've also, though, told them beforehand to do this, but in 30 seconds or less. So let me give you a quick example of how that would work. Okay, a pet. Ooh, I don't have a pet, unfortunately. I had a black lab, and that was my first baby. So I guess my 3 children are my pets. My peeve. I'm a big believer that if you're gonna do something, do it 100% or don't do it at all. And my motto is ask forgiveness later and forgive fast and often. And hopefully during the panel, I'll be able to explain some of that as it relates to online education. So what we're gonna do is have our panelists shut their videos off, except for our very first panelist, who is Eduardo Peñalver. Hi, Eduardo. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sorry? Before you go ahead.
I think we have a little delay, I'm sorry.
You know, it's important that you noted that because that happens a lot in online education. It's a little bit like the old cell phones. Do you remember, I'm sorry if I'm dating you, Eduardo, in history, but do you remember when the first cell phones came out? And literally there was a huge pause. And so sometimes you just both end up talking over each other. And that happens in online education all the time. And if there's hierarchies involved, oh boy, can that cause friction and teaming. And so in Law Without Walls, we always do what you do. We do a little ABC test to see who's lagging. And we talk about how interruptions aren't necessarily rude behaviors online because it's about your connection speed. So thank you for pointing that out because that's part of what we're here for this panel to do and talk about. Okay,
I'm glad we could give that demonstration.
Right. I'm glad we did that right on the spot. It wasn't planned, but we went with it. That's the other thing about online education. Sometimes whatever you plan doesn't go right, but you go with it.
It's 5 o'clock.
Like my clock telling me it's 5 o'clock. Okay, so Eduardo, I'm gonna say a few things about your background so you can get revved up to tell us your pet peeve and your motto. So Eduardo is the Allan R. Tessler Dean and Professor of Law at Cornell Law School, and he was the first Latino Dean of an Ivy League law school. Dean Peñalver, Eduardo, most recently served as the John P. Wilson Professor of Law at the University of Chicago. And his scholarship focuses on property and land use, as well as religion and law. And his work explores really how the law kind of intersects with and mediates the interests of individuals and communities. He's written a book, or a few, but one most recently on property theory. And will you share with us your pet, your peeve, your motto, and then give us your 3-minute presentation?
Okay, thank you again for inviting me. My pet is Griffey, who's a black lab, great dog. My peeve, I should say my peeve is when the black lab goes over to the neighbor's house and does his business over there. I just spent the morning reinforcing a fence to keep him from doing that. But my actual peeve, the one that's most relevant to the topic today is the your internet is unstable message that I get on Zoom. I hate that thing. And my motto kind of follows up on the last panel, where they ended. My motto is, I am out of the prediction business. So what thought I would just talk about my couple minutes here at the beginning, and I'm really eager to hear from the others and get to the Q&A, is just to emphasize the importance of distinguishing between the experience of online education as we're all experiencing it now in this kind of the midst of this crisis and the sudden move to online education in the spring and even the more planned move that many of us are making in the fall of 2020, and the online education in normal times, right? So at Cornell we've experienced both. We have an online master's program that's launching in January, and that has been in the works for years, right? And it looks and feels, and I think this is true generally of online education, it looks and feels very different than the online education that we're all going through. Even with all the planning we can do this summer and the preparation, it's just the things that we can do online with the normal resources and planning that go into the production of a really high quality online degree. It's just vastly different than a kind of synchronous Zoom classroom, even with months to prepare. I would say the dominant mode of our online master's program is asynchronous. It's not even a flipped classroom. I mean, it's pre-produced video. The class is, with a very high production quality. The material is broken down into really small modules, 8 to 10 minutes, followed by immediate kind of interactive assessment so that we can figure out whether people have understood the material and are processing it appropriately. It's self-paced. It's really just a very different experience than what we're doing with our students this fall. And I think that it's important to keep this distinction in mind, just because I hope that we don't learn lessons from this crisis that are the wrong lessons to learn about online education, that the things that are bothering us or the things we're struggling with in the midst of this crisis are reflective of online education generally, right? I think it's important to keep in mind how good it can be. And when we have all the resources and the time to do it right. And that's not to say that we're slacking somehow. I mean, we're doing as well as we can. Really, everyone's working so hard this summer to adapt their materials to the online format, but it's just not enough time. It's not enough time to do it as well as it can be done. I think it's so important that that law schools be engaging in online education. It allows us to reach our students where they are, and really when they are. It allows us to offer degrees to make legal education accessible to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to come to campus and spend a year or many years getting a degree from us. So it's an important space for us to be in. I think it's an important modality for delivering education. And right now it's like a lifeline for us, right, in the midst of the crisis. But I think it's really important that we keep this distinction in mind and think about how much better it can be than what we're experiencing right now.
Awesome. I couldn't agree with you more. there's nothing worse as well as spending time this summer trying to develop some really good content and then having the tech not work, having to re-record, or like I have great quality videos, but because Blackboard only lets you upload certain sizes, they still look crappy. So I'm very jealous of your online master's program, having had all that time to really do it right. And totally agree that it'd be great if we could do it right away, and yet some of us can't. So hopefully our students will be empathetic with us, and hopefully we will all, remember your thoughts, Eduardo, and realize that just because we're doing it this way this summer doesn't mean we don't need to recreate it the right way in the future. Okay, so thank you so much, Eduardo. We're going to move on to our next speaker for today, which is Nina. So Nina Kohn, if you want to put your video on. Nina is the David M. Levy Professor of Law, Faculty Director of Online Education at Syracuse. I wonder why she's on this panel. Just kidding. Your big smile. And she is a faculty affiliate with Syracuse University's Aging Studies Institute. And she's also a member of the American Law Institute. And her bio goes on and on. She is teaching a seminar this year on law and aging, and she focuses her research really on elder law and civil rights of older people with diminished cognitive capacity. And she's gonna talk to us today a little bit about what she really feels strongly about. But before she does, Nina, could you share with us your pet, your peeve, and your motto?
Sure. So I have two small bipeds who hopefully will be out of this space. My peeve is low expectations. And I guess for a motto, I would say, when in doubt, be kind.
Well, that's awesome. And this universe today, and that relates back to some of the earlier panels on, inclusivity and the impact the disparate impact that COVID is having, especially on vulnerable client populations. So love that message. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. So I actually want to start with a really simple proposition, which is that excellent teaching and learning can occur online, and really terrible teaching and no learning can occur online, just as in a residential classroom. And I think a key factor that's going to determine the relative balance between the two are the expectations we set for ourselves as teachers and for our students. So since March, I've spent a lot of time working with faculty who are transitioning to online teaching. And what I hear over and over is I can't do this or I can't do that because online. And yet the reality is that with the right resources, with training, with vaguely reasonable class sizes, and with smart choices as to format, you can do virtually everything you would do in a residential classroom online, and you can do it really well. You can have engaged Socratic dialogues. You can do small group work, debates, real-time drafting exercises. And as Yvonne has shown in her work, you can do excellent formative assessment. So if online education is going to improve student learning over the long term, we need to stop thinking of technology as a limiting factor. And what we need to be doing is starting with the two questions. What do I want students to learn? And what are my strengths as a teacher? And then choosing technology tools that match those goals and those strengths. As important as it is for us to have high expectations for ourselves, I also think it's just as important to have high expectations for our students. And not to expect less of students simply because class has moved online. And certainly not to assume that certain groups of students can't succeed online. Rather, what we need to be doing is identifying the barriers to student success online and helping break those down. So let me give you a concrete example that was brought up in the first panel. You know that amid COVID-19, many faculty chose not to require students to participate in live class or not to ask them to turn on the cameras. And that was well-meaning, right? Faculty were concerned that students were coming from disparate backgrounds, had poor internet, but appearing live on webcam enhances the classroom experience and it enhances student learning. It allows faculty to read the room, it helps the student pay attention, and when you don't encourage attendance on webcam, what you're doing is suggesting to students that there are some students whose backgrounds aren't up to snuff and that they should be silenced, or that their voices aren't necessary to the classroom. And what you get then is that those coming from privileged backgrounds get a visibility and they get attention, and we actually worsen some of the problems that Cass Sunstein was describing in his opening remarks. So rather, what we want to be doing is not giving students a pass on something that's critical for their own learning, but instead explaining to them why appearing on camera is valuable, how they can protect their privacy when on camera, and welcoming them to appear regardless of their location, and acknowledging them and celebrating them when they are putting in an effort despite the chaos that is in their background. So more broadly, I guess my point is this. What we need to be doing is helping students to understand the barriers to learning, including the technology-related ones, help them strategize around those, and that will help us reduce the imbalances created by privilege, the imbalances created by asymmetric information. And I'll just end by noting that in my forthcoming Journal of Legal Education article, which I actually wrote for today, I go into this in some more detail and suggest the types of expectations you might lay out for your students and the advice you might give them to help level the playing field and overall improve the learning experience in an online classroom.
Well, that is fantastic. You know, what you're talking about in terms of limiting barriers and breaking down walls is exactly why Law Without Walls is called Law Without Walls. It was designed to break down the barriers that exist, the hierarchies, the inequalities between students from different ranking schools, different countries, different cultures, and also between professors and students. And so that's why 10 years ago we went, Law Without Walls was part virtual, and I totally agree with you, Nina. We do everything, all of our meetings online for most of the semester. And yes, does it take more work to figure out how to do it online if you're not just, you can't just do what you do in the class online. But I think that online education could be a leveler, as opposed to one that creates these differences. I agree that it could also create these negative differences. But in working with 35 law and business schools from around the world and students and lawyers from all over the country online and dealing with those issues, I have had great success in doing some of the things that you suggest and that you've written about. So thank you so much for those contributions. And I know the world is trying to learn from, leaders like all of these panelists so that they can help make sure that online education is leveraged in the right way. Thank you so much, Nina. So we're going to move to Rhonda. Rhonda, I fear I'm going to butcher your last name, so I'm going to have you turn your video on and say it for me. But you have to unmute. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
It's Magee, M-A-G-E-E.
Yeah, McKee. Okay.
Yeah.
I know when we met, I practiced it, and somehow in all my Blackboard content development that I spent today, I have nothing left in my brain. So Rhonda, I'm going to introduce you right before you give us your pet, your peeve, and your motto. So Rhonda is a professor at the University of San Francisco School of Law, and she teaches and focuses on mindfulness and mindfulness-based stress reduction. Wow. Have you hit the nail on the head for the right concentration? No offense to the rest of the panelists, but do we need Rhonda more than ever? If we had a chat, I'd be seeing the +1s going up, because stress reduction interventions for lawyers and law students, and also minimizing social identity-based bias, right? So those two things are they've always been important, but they just seem to have, right now during this pandemic, have really, really come to a head. She's a Dean Circle Research Scholar and has served as the co-director of the University Center for Teaching Excellence. I wonder why you're on this panel. And she also teaches torts, race law and policy, and some mindful law stuff. She's written a bunch of stuff. She's the founding member of the executive board of the AALS's section on balance in legal education, and its subsection on mindfulness. Now, just so everyone knows, I am not reading everybody's bio, so I've been picking and choosing what I think people out there would like to hear. But of course, go to LinkedIn, link in with us, and read our entire bios there. Rhonda, I'm gonna turn to you and ask you your pet, your peeve, and your motto.
Well, it's such a fun question. And it's good to be here with you and everybody here on the call. So I guess I'm just going to think of a pet in a kind of a slightly literal way. I don't have a physical pet, dog or anything like that. I have, but I think of now my little succulent plants as my pets right now. I have like little beautiful, small cacti and just little plants that I kind of love up on these days. My peeve is online connectivity challenges, and I had one. I was on for the conference for several sessions earlier, took a little break, and I came back and I was having challenges. So that's my peeve. It's, it's like one of the aspects of this work at this time that can have an additional layer of stress when something can come up. So that perhaps brings me to my next point, which is my motto, which, drawing on, mindfulness as a practice, is that, and this is borrowing from one of my teachers, John Kabat-Zinn, who famously says, if you're breathing in this moment, there's more right with you than wrong with you. And I extend that to, if we're breathing together, there's more right with what we're doing together as a multicultural community, as a community of teachers and learning. There's always more right than wrong. It's another way of saying I tend to try to look at the glass half full than half empty. So yeah, thank you so much for asking me those questions.
So I loved hearing your answers. If your plants are listening to you, I'm sure. In fact, I think the world's listening to us. I'm not going to say ALEXA out loud for various reasons, but what I love is that you shared that you too get frustrated with tech because you're like the guru of mindfulness and like stress reduction. So if you can get stressed over that, then wow, I don't feel so bad when I'm behind the scenes going, when I'm in one Zoom room and need to go to another one, and then you're sweating when you show up, even though you haven't even gotten out of your chair. So I hear you. Well, we're glad you worked through it, and we'd love to hear your 3-minute focus.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I guess what we just said is a way of segue into it, because I think that I do rely on mindfulness as a pedagogical support, and there are a few dimensions of that. There may be multiple dimensions of how mindfulness, or what we in the field call contemplative pedagogy practices. So these are practices that support deepening awareness as a modality for teaching and learning, for knowing, but also there's that well-being aspect. There's the aspect of how these practices can support us in navigating a world which is, turbulent, chaotic, volatile, uncertain, all of these different things that we know to be true of this time. So I guess one of the things that I really want to just highlight is how contemplative practices, and not only mindfulness, but that's one of the practices, as you mentioned, that I draw on, can really support us during this time. And we've all been hearing throughout the day the different kinds of challenges, from those that really just adhere to what it means to bring together people from different backgrounds for a conversation about complicated but important matters, right? And the risk of some folks having their voice feel silenced, or not feeling that they are safe enough to share what they really think. The challenges that come, again, that are particularly arrayed when we know that people are literally showing up. We look like we're all completely equal in this mosaic of the Zoom tiles, but actually we're coming from very different backgrounds and with very different levels of resource support, structural and personal kinds of supports for our being here. So that minoritized populations and women and people who are parents and people who may be taking care of elderly or others in this time might have different pressures. And then you add to those kind of personal sorts of challenges, the systemic challenges that we know we're dealing with as members of a profession, the members within legal education and beyond. And we know that our students are dealing with a lot. So, you know, thinking about our teaching and learning as an opportunity to help build up capacity for dealing with stress, whether it's ourselves or our students, as we underscore how these practices can also deepen students' ability to perform under stress, right? So that we see this is not just about personal well-being, but also actually about performance in many ways, and a kind of an additive when we think about what it means to be excellent during this time. So yeah, for me, just to say, mindfulness does invite a personal set of practices that can support us in interpersonal engagement more effectively, dealing with emotional reactivity, dealing with you know, cognitive and emotive dissonance that can come when we come together from different perspectives and looking at the same sets of facts, have totally different reactions based on our experiences. You know, the research has been shown to help build that capacity to respond rather than react when we find ourselves in those kinds of personally challenging, if not triggering moments. And there are many other ways that mindfulness can help. Compassion practices, empathy practices can support us in the inner work of being able to kind of take a breath before we go into attack mode when we are feeling the threat of reactivity around, you know, these sorts of topics that can make us crazy. So there are like personal practices of mindfulness, and the commitment to that can help us deepen our own well-being, provide, again, some greater resilience for ourselves. And I just want to say, although people have the idea that mindfulness is about putting you in the space of being in an ever-present spa-like bubble of calm, that's actually not how I see mindfulness at all. It's really about deepening your capacity to sort of be present with whatever is arising. There might be things to be joyful about. You just want to feel that joy, not like just kind of moderate it out so you kind of equally feel the same, whether you're in a moment of great intense joy or intense sadness. So mindfulness can help us just be present. And from that place, we can, again, deepen that ability to respond rather than react, which is going to be important, I think, on so many levels. And lastly, I just want to say, for us as faculty, having a personal practice of mindfulness can support us in all of these different challenges that we're facing, whether it's, you know, all the transitions and transformations we're trying to make to meet the challenge of this moment, but also attuning and attending, right, to what's happening in the classroom, the different classroom dynamical challenges that we're facing with Zoom. How do we notice when somebody's feeling silenced and needs to be brought in? How do we notice when somebody might need a little bit more attending? So I just want to, I think there's just a period of radical information gathering. We don't have all the answers, but we do have some basis to feel grounded in supportive practices like mindfulness, research grounded practices that really are beautiful technologies for dealing with change and uncertainty. And so whether we engage them for ourselves, offer them to our students, which is something more, I know Miami does, we do at USF as well. These are things that we can rely on, I think, and should more confidently, based on the research, rely on as we navigate this particularly unprecedentedly challenging time.
Well, thank you so much for that. You said something that really, it spurred a memory from about, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago. Scott Rogers, who's our head of mindfulness here at the University of Miami, I asked him to come to my civil procedure class because I felt like I wanted to give them something in addition. Or maybe it was my legal profession class. I think it was my legal profession class about, you know, stress of being a lawyer and whatnot. I thought I knew what it was. And then when he got there and I sat in and I was like, oh, I had no idea what mindfulness was. So I think you bring up a good point. I think a lot of people think they know what it is. It's sort of like in Princess Bride when that guy says, inconceivable. And then he says, I do not think you know what that word means. What that means, yeah. Right? So, I mean, that's how I feel like with mindfulness. And one of the things that I'm doing in my online class to build community is each week there's a community exercise and they have to share, like to share a personal video. They have to, we have different things we're going to do. But now I'm thinking maybe I should just put in one of my activities in Blackboard because, you make them do it before they go to the next one. Can they cheat? Yeah, not do it. Yes. But I could put one of Scott Rogers. He's got these like little 3-minute, for the next 3 minutes, try this exercise. And I'd be doing them a favor because some students will do it. And it'll be because I care. Whereas, and so this panel, we're trying to point out not just the things not to do, but the things, the opportunities that this is bringing us So I think I'm going to do that. So if you have any advice on that,
Yeah.
send me an email, because I think I'm going to do that now. Thank you.
Yeah,
for
and again, it's personal well-being and the relational well-being that we need to help emphasize at this time.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Rhonda. We are going to move to Yvonne. Yvonne, if you want to turn your, see, I even wrote down the pronunciation and didn't do a great job of it. You say it.
Yvonne.
Okay. Dutton. I got that right? Or not? Perfect. Okay. So she's a professor of law and Dean's Fellow and Grimes Fellow at Indiana University. And she teaches evidence, I think, in criminal law and international criminal law, international law and comparative law. Actually, a really great time to be an expert in all of those things. Really, it's true. And also international human rights. So she was a fellow in Columbia Law School's Careers in Law and Teaching program, just tying some of your background to why you're on this panel. And she received the Red Cane Award for Best New Professor in 2015. And she received the Trustees Teaching Award in 2016. So we can't wait to learn from you. And since you've received all these awards, we know we're going to learn something. But before you teach us as a professor, we want to have a little fun and hear your pet, your peeve, and your motto.
Okay, sure. I don't have any pets. I love pets, but I don't have any. My peeve is probably procrastination. I don't like to wait too long to start something. It makes me panicky, and I don't like to see my students wait too long to start anything. Let's see, my motto, kind of sort of related to Nina's, I think, is I think that as a professor and a student, sort of what you get out of a class has a lot to do with what you put into it. And so I'll talk a little bit about that too.
So I totally agree. Just recently I read a paper on describing a flipped classroom with civil procedure. And it's a lot of work on my part, because basically I'm just taking everything I used to do, just standing up and talking, and doing them in snippets and trying to make sure they learn. But the good thing, and then so that the flipped classroom is going to be to address questions and do group projects. But the good thing is the procrastination. I can actually give them due dates and make sure that they're doing things when I think they should be doing them, as opposed to 3 a.m. before class. Mm-hmm. So just trying to point out some silver linings with that, and I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. And so the pet peeve and the motto basically lead me to some of the thoughts that I wanted to talk about with, the challenges of the pandemic, and then this having to effectively teach online. We're all under a lot of stress, both student and teacher, and there's so many things pulling for our attention, So, and I try to think, what can we as a teacher then do to help motivate our students and to really get them engaged in the learning process? And so one of my key strategies, and you've sort of touched on it a little bit, Michele, already, is, I encourage them in my online classes by regularly assigning formative assessments, and then regularly also following that up with feedback. So twice a week, usually, sometimes more, they have a formative assessment that they have to do, and it's due by a certain due date. So they don't get to choose when it's due. So we're sort of forcing that on them. And I teach asynchronously, and I think we talked a little bit about that with Eduardo, and some other folks mentioned it earlier today. And as we all know, with asynchronous teaching, we need that interaction that's equivalent to the interaction that we would be having in our class time. And we heard that talk in the prior panel when we talked about this substantive interaction. And so assessments and the feedback are components of this interaction, and they count towards the time of interaction. So it's sort of forced on us in an asynchronous class, but it turns out to be a good thing, right? We're putting the students on the spot to assess how they're doing on a regular basis every few days, and we're giving them some feedback that they can, internalize and perhaps build on. And so I think that's really great. I've conducted anonymous surveys with my students and also done focus groups, because Indiana University started an online programming back in 2015. So we've had sort of a benefit of doing this for a while. And I have consistently heard from students that while they might not love to do assessments, they appreciate it. They find they have consistently said it keeps me on track. It makes me find out how I'm doing. It makes me figure out whether I understood the reading in the lecture. I've also heard great things about feedback, and you can imagine I think they like the connection in part because they're hearing from me pretty regularly, and they're getting, personal feedback as well. So they like that connection feeling. But also they say, this is something that in many of my law school classes, I don't get, right? I don't get regular feedback as I go along. I usually get a summative assessment in terms of my final exam. And so I'm getting a lot of positive feedback about assessments and feedback, and I think that this is a great thing. But now going back to my pet peeve and my motto, this whole process of assessment and feedback really only produces this sort of happy result and the engaged student if the students put the work in to it, right? So I'll give an example. In my comparative law class, I require students to write these short memos, comparative memos in the last 4 or 5 weeks of class. And I'll comment on every paper individually. And then in some cases, I'll also require peer reviews of student to student. But as I tell the students, you're going to get a lot more out of me in terms of comments if you've really, you've spent some time on this paper, right? And maybe you've incorporated my prior comments about organizational structure. But if we're into our third, paper and you still haven't gotten the organization down, my comment's going to be, you need to get the organization down. So you're never going to progress to these itty bitty comments of, now let's talk about, topic sentences or how you could have used the evidence better to support your position, right? We never get to those levels if the student hasn't put in the work. And so the goal is that we incentivize the students to take advantage of this feedback to make them not only do better on the final exam, but also master these lawyerly skills. And I think we have these opportunities in our online classes to incorporate these sorts of things. Now, one thing I want to say is all of this assigning and feedback might sound overwhelming to people who are, just starting out kind of in this online environment, but it is, and it's a lot of work, but I have found that it's worth it. Students appreciate it for the most part, right? Let's say 90% of them. And I think that they learn a lot, and you get to help them improve as they go along. And so I think that this is sort of a benefit of being forced to go online in a way and being forced to do this interaction, right, to comply with the ABA. It forces this assessment and it forces this feedback. And I think it's one of the things that might, because some of the earlier panels talked about this, what might be some of the outcomes long-term from this experiment of being forced to go online. We might see that there's more of a call for formative assessments and feedback as we go along. And it might help a certain group of students who, I think there are those students who are in the class, they don't know how well they're doing, right? They think they're doing well, but with this regular assessment and feedback, they can start to figure that out earlier on, and we can get an intervention going earlier if we learn that there is a problem catching on.
And that'll actually help maybe make online a leveler,
right,
level, because then we can identify and help as opposed to not.
Right.
So thing you said, so one of the things that I'm a big believer in, especially with my teenagers, is I've got to help them help themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And when I've said that to them, I ask them, okay, instead of punishing you, let's figure out what we can do choice next time. So for example, for me, I keep only Oreos around in the house because I don't like Oreos. So when I say that to my teenagers, they're like, oh, I get what you mean. I said, yeah. Right. So for online education, having assessments is us helping them help themselves. Now, right. This is the weird thing that happened to me the other day. I finished my video, my daughter comes in and she was like, oh, you're such a chill professor. I was like, why are you saying that? She goes, because your last question was like 10 minutes before that video was over. So they don't have to watch the last 10 minutes. That's so cool, Mom. And I was like, oh, I never even thought of that. I'm to help my students help themselves by putting a question at the end of my video now. Other thing that you said that made me think about and tied to what Yvonne was saying was feedback. So what I've done now as my last question for every video or document, I ask 2 questions. One is, how long did it take you to do this task? Because I'm working in the dark. And so, and I give them options, and I also have 2 options that are wrong. So it's like, if the video is 10 minutes and they did it in under 10 minutes, that's the wrong answer. Then I give them 3 right ones with a pad. And then if it's taking them over 2 hours, then it's wrong. And adjust that when I see what it's, how it's working. Second question I ask at the end is, did this help you? And I ask it funny. I'll be like, yeah, rotten tomatoes. And each time I ask it slightly differently for them to give me feedback on whether they thought it was helpful or not.
Awesome.
Those are my 2 tidbits that I have. The one from my daughter was amazing. Like, I was like, that's chill, not that chill. Okay. That was awesome. Sorry. And I said that we heard from Yvonne earlier. I meant that I don't remember who I was referring to, but anyway, you were talking about feedback earlier, and this really ties to that.
Yes.
Okay. So we have one more speaker, right? So Mary Lynch, are you there? Will you put your video on for us?
I think we have another Michele before me.
Oh, you're right. See, how could I skip myself? She's
No, Michele Pistone.
I was kidding. We have the same, and we're both Italian, and I don't know how I did that. So Michele, I had you in the wrong order in my notes. Michele, why don't you pop up and we'll do Mary after Michele. My kindred spirit, Michele, the Italian. There we are. Okay, not forgettable. Michele Pistone, you are a professor of law, and you direct and teach the clinics for asylum and immigrant services. I think that stands for CARES. And you founded the law school's in-house clinical program. And you're also at Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation. That is so cool. And you're co-authoring Disrupting Law. Can't wait to hear about some of that. She's also a fellow at the Institute for the Advancement of American Legal Systems, Educating Tomorrow's Lawyers. So we know another reason why you're on this panel. And you have a bunch of research and writing. Some of it focuses on technological innovations in the practice of law and in legal education, asylum and refugee law, immigration law, migration, and a new book, Stepping Out of the Brain Drain, Applying Catholic Social Teaching in the New Era of Migration. She also founded Legal Ed, right, which is an online community of legal scholars. Wow. And again, I have not been able to get through everyone's bios. I haven't been able to say that all the many, many talented things. But Michele, we can't wait to hear from you. And but first, before we hear from you, we want to hear your pet, your peeve, and your motto.
All right. So during COVID, I've spent a lot of time working on my back deck because I have 3 other people in the household, and that's like the one place I can find quiet. And I've come to appreciate this flycatcher family that's been nesting next to my deck. So I kind of consider them my pets. And as to my peeve, perfectionism. I feel like perfectionism is always kind of the thing that prevents us from learning and growing. And so that's my peeve. And my motto is related to that we learn from our mistakes. And I feel like as people that are venturing into this new world of online education, that we need to appreciate that there are lessons that come out of everything that we're doing, and we should take some time to learn them and improve.
Well, Villanova is sure lucky to have you, because if you are a perfectionist, you will never finish your online content.
Exactly, right?
Right? You just can't, so one of the problems I'm having is we use this tool called Feedback Fruits, and you can't set your own thumbnail. And so sometimes the video opens up and I'm like, and it's the horrible picture. And if you're, a perfectionist or vain or both, you can't change it, then you'll try to re-record and it doesn't work. So talk to us about, I know you're going to share with us some of your advice, and talk to us about your focus, and share with us all your great knowledge in 3 minutes.
All right. So I actually have a PowerPoint that I wanted to share.
Yeah.
And this is something that I created in relation to a webinar that I did a few weeks ago for the AALS section on technology, law, and legal education. And it was in kind of preparing for that. So the topic of the talk was the top 5 tips for teaching law online. And in preparation for that, I reached out to the community and asked for people's pain points. And I thought that it would be interesting and one of the challenges of being one of the last speakers is that a lot of the topics that I'm going to talk about have already been discussed. But basically what I heard from faculty is that these are the major pain points. How do I make the experience more like a classroom? How do I engage students online? How do I assess learning and provide feedback? So Yvonne, how do I maximize my impact, and how do I work with technology? And so I thought I'd share the 5 tips that I have that relate to each of these. So with respect to my ideas about how do we make the experience more like a classroom, I think that in online education, one of the key messages that we're hearing today is that we really need to shift our mindset. That online education is different. And if we're trying to reproduce what we do in the classroom, we're going to fail. And that there are a lot of opportunities that present themselves in online education, and we can take advantage of those. I think one thing that's helped me in this perspective is to think about the difference between teaching and learning, and to realize that teaching and learning are 2 verbs done by 2 separate groups of actors. And a lot of times as a teacher, I assume that if I taught something, my students had learned it. And I think online education is really helpful to break that and to get us to start thinking about things from a student-centered perspective. And that's my next top tip. How do we engage students? I think we need to employ student-centered design and think about the things that are impacting our students that we heard about earlier from Rhonda, for example, and incorporate that into how we design our classes. And it can't be just lecture, because we know from our own experiences about, Zoom fatigue. The third thing is about, Yvonne, assessment and feedback. So how do we assess learning and provide feedback is we use formative assessments. And I think that there's so much opportunity in an online setting to create formative assessments. It's a lot of work at the beginning, at the front end, to create them, but then you can use them semester after semester. And if we use quizzes, they're all taught through they're all graded through the LMS system. So while there's an upfront investment, there's a lot of benefit from the students, as Yvonne said, because students then get a sense of what they know and what they don't know. And so it empowers them to learn and kind of fill in the gaps. And it also, I think, as a teacher, assessment gives us feedback about how our students are learning. And in an online setting, we can then take that feedback and adjust how we're teaching or what we're teaching based on the issues that we see in the student's work product. So that's my third tip. And then the fourth, how do I maximize my impact? I think and this is another point that was mentioned earlier today, I think by Eduardo, but the idea of thinking about time and space differently. And he said a quote which I love, which is thinking about when the students are, when they are. So we don't necessarily have to think about doing everything synchronously, but to take advantage of the time before students get to class and the time after class. I think we also heard that earlier today from Glenn Kohn, that idea of preparing for a dinner party. I thought that was a great analogy, and the ways that we can maybe incorporate things before and after before and after class. And then the last tip, how do I work with technology? And here this relates again to my my peeve and my motto, which is basically jump in, ask questions, and have fun. And if we're not perfectionists, we can realize that we learn through this and that we're going to get better over time. The first video is not going to be your best product, but just do it and try it. And then as you get more familiar with the technology and more familiar with using polls and using breakout groups and all the things that online can offer us, we can really, I think, learn and grow as professors. And I think in the end, we'll benefit and our students will benefit. So those are my top 5 tips in hopefully 3 minutes or less.
Yeah, and you also helped us display something, 2 things, just like with Eduardo, we had a moment. Number 1, I messed up and didn't actually call you up when you were supposed to be in the next. And what Mary did was so awesome because she jumped in and saved me, right? So, and that would happen in real life as well. And when it's very true, an audience will always save the person on the stage. Yet, if this were an in-person panel, I wouldn't have skipped you because you would have been sitting right there and I would have seen you, but that's not the view I have going on in my Zoom right now. So I skipped you. And so that can happen in online, that doesn't happen in real, but Mary did me a solid and you did me a solid. You know what? Because you didn't get ruffled and you didn't get offended. And it's really important in online education that we give everybody the benefit of the doubt, our students especially, because online, there's not as much tone. Like I always tell my daughter, there's no tone in text. And so it's also true that we make some mistakes that we don't mean to make, that, in the real world, if I just skipped you in the real live world and you were sitting right next to me on the panel, that would be a trigger. That would mean that I was purposely skipping you. And online, if you felt that way, you would have been like, I'm out of here, that Michele. But you were so gracious about it. And I think that that's something we all have to keep in mind about these types of mistakes, which again goes to your thank goodness you're not a perfectionist. She would have been very mad at me. Okay, thank you so much for that, Michele. Okay, so we are now going to move on to Mary. Mary, do you want to put your video on for us?
Here.
Great. Hi.
Hi.
I love your back. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
So let me say a few words about your background for everybody, and then we'll move to your pet peeve and your motto. So Mary Lynch is the Kate Stoneman Chair in Law and Democracy and Director of the Center for Excellence in Law Teaching and the Director for Domestic Violence Prosecution Hybrid Clinic at Albany Law School. I don't know how you have time to be here because it sounds like you have a ton of things going on. She specializes in violence against women issues and criminal procedure and clinical education, and is the director of, as I mentioned before, the Center for Excellence in Law Teaching. So we know one of the main reasons you are here today. And she's also an editor and frequent contributor to the Best Practices for Legal Education blog, and is the co-president of the Clinical Legal Education Association, and received the Albany Law School's Excellence in Teaching Award. So we're just really excited to, you're last but not least. And how about we get your pet, your peeve, and your motto?
All right, I'm ready. So my pet is a hilariously opinionated, or if you're judgmental, you would say a very cranky, deaf, and aggressive dog that is 15 years old and who we love to death. My peeve. I have a general peeve, and I'm going to give 2 examples. My peeve is uncritical assumptions that prop up, I think, bias and stagnancy in both our profession and in legal education. So examples would be this unstated assumption that doctrinally focused classes somehow are better at teaching you how to think like a lawyer than clinical classes, or that we don't give the context, we don't focus on the right things. A second example of my peeve would be sort of this, again, uncritical, non-reflective assumption that speededness in exam taking is great license, great gatekeeping for consumers and in our bar exams or in our final exams. So I get more peevish as the day goes on, so that's why I had 2. Now, what's my motto? So one of my mottos when I started the Center for Excellence in Law Teaching, I'm stepping down this summer, letting some new energy come into that and some other areas. You have to say with a brogue. So it's education is not the filling of a pail or a bucket. it is the lighting of a fire. And I think that's part of what, you know, I think it's Yates, but I think part of that is exactly what we all know. The joy we get in teaching is when we know that we facilitated the embers that were there and the fire that got lit. And that gives you the motivation to be disciplined, to put in the hard work, and to know that you can do it. So those are my, I also have a Tweak Nietzsche quote that I'm throwing in because I was last. So it's not that I'm a Nietzsche fan, but one must have to permit some students-initiated chaos in your courses to be able to give birth to a dancing star.
Oh, I love that. I wish we had you say it as the close to our panel. Maybe I'll have your, that was fantastic. And I'm glad you're not as cranky as your dog.
She's great. I just think she's like, no one should be smelling my butt. And I agree with her. So
I hear you. You know what? You don't get to pick your dogs once they come, and you have to love them the way they are. And you know, when your second peeve about time is interesting. And I think that online education is really going to help that issue, because yes, there might be timed exams, but if we're giving assessments along the way, there's other ways that the students are being graded other than just one exam at the end. And if we're doing different types of projects, right? Because the one exam at the end, I get it that there are certain types of lawyers that think on the spot and know it within and have to just know it and do it. But usually we've got time to go look something up, mull it over.
I got to interrupt here because you told me I could. So here's the deal. I teach prosecution of sexual assault crimes. Yes, there are times where you better stand up and object, or bad evidence is getting in that shouldn't get it, that's going to, you know, really bias the jury. That's not what's tested on the bar exam. That's not, if you don't go back and check the books when you know something, you're committing malpractice. So what we do is we take these concepts and we take them out of context, and then we conflate them, and we ignore disparate impact and bias that suggests that those from economically and other advantaged areas, disadvantaged, are not going to meet that. So I'm sorry.
I totally agree. I'm just looking for my favorite civil procedure book. I can't always hold it up to the students and I say, of course you're going to bring your book with you. If you don't bring your book to the exam, that's like malpractice. You do not, I don't want you to memorize the rule. I want you to know there is a rule and then go reread it. Because what if they changed it from 6 days to 10 days from a year ago and you didn't look it up, and you totally, like, you have to go look. And so I think there is something really wonky about the fact that our exams have these parameters. You have to know it without even checking. When, if I was hiring a lawyer, I sure hope they double check. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to you for your 3 minutes, Mary.
Okay, all right, and I'm going to try to make it really quick so we can get to some question and answers. But so when I think of, I am not an online teacher. I haven't been. It was the kind of thing I was going to, you know, spend one summer doing when I didn't do some other presentations or scholarship or other things. But since April, I really did the most I could in the emergency remote teaching. But since then, I've really taken to the online space and have spent the entire summer at every Michelle's boot camps and all kinds of things. And what's really interesting to me is that if online learning is put in the context of what we already know about deep learning and legal education, it is just another tool that we can use. And it reminds me a lot of clinical education. Clinical education is not 2 hours twice a week for 2 hours, right? It's not, it's segmented into time that you didn't know that you would have to spend as a professor. It's when the court tells you. It's when there's an order of protection that's needed. So in terms of that, we've had to access the students at times that were not directly on the course schedule. So how am I going to think about it this fall? Because now I'm at a school that's doing like hybrid flex, and I'm going to be going remote because of who's an elder who's living with me, and my own health. I'm not as young as I once was. But in any event, here are the 3 things I think could be touchstones and that really come from the previous folks on the panel. So one would be reduce unrealistic expectations that are rooted in past semesters. So comparison is the thief of joy. if we keep thinking about, oh, in the classroom, I used to do this. And I think Michele has talked to us about that and others that, so this is going to be different. And almost acknowledging that from the beginning for our students and ourselves maybe helps with Rhonda's great advice about how we can have some mindfulness about it. The second, I think, sort of touchstone, and you can think of this as three, legs of a stool or strands, or if you're a more Celtic spiritual or feminine or yin, you can think of it as like circular Venn diagrams with the sweet spot in the middle. The second piece is prioritizing deep and engaged learning over coverage of doctrine, coverage of skills, or sage on the stage wisdom. We've known this for a long time. Those of us involved in the legal education reform movement really engaged with the learning environment, and we know that. And number three, I think, that I would think about. So reduce unrealistic expectations, prioritize deep and engaged learning, create those buckets, because the coverage stuff you can study for the bar exam, or you can take another course, or once you've gotten that deep learning, you have the ability to learn things yourself. The third is to equip myself and my students with habits of reflection, flexibility, empathy, and hope, so that they can navigate what is going to be a very challenging semester for them and for us, and a very challenging time to be in a professional graduate course, given what's going to happen to the economy, given the nastiness we know that's going to happen with this election coming until November, given the fact that there still isn't a unified sense in this country of how it is we deal with this public health crisis, and there may not be in your own extended family. So given all that, given the burdens of childcare, et cetera, what are the attitudes, the values of our profession, the skill building that we can do no matter what course we teach? And I think if that's sort of the overview by which you then tweak, it doesn't matter if 1 week, your experiment didn't work, because we know from what students say make the best law teachers, that those higher level goals are the things that they remember.
I love that, leaving that you're ending us on that, the higher level goals. We have only 3 minutes left, and are going to take one question. And
Everyone should open there. Remember, we're all going to open our videos now.
Unless we just want Mary to have to answer it, because it's not an easy one. Jeremy Paul asked, if you bring your young children to a party, no one says to you, oh, gee, your kids are so cool, they're so disruptive. So how does disruption become a positive? Who wants that one? You do?
I think
I'll take oh, go ahead, Nina.
I think the question is, are you disrupting something that was working well to begin with, or are you disrupting something that was not working well to begin with? And so how we may see online education may depend in part on how good a job we thought residential education was doing pre-pandemic. That said, I don't think people actually want to see your children anywhere, but it may be really, really helpful if they do. And so not being able to censor in the way that we historically have may allow us to be much more humane as lawyers and as teachers, and perhaps get at some of the empathy issues that were addressed right at the beginning by Michele.
And I would just add the literature on humanizing legal education. And I think that the wellness that has come from the ABA in every place, I mean, the suicides that have occurred, we can expect that wellness is an issue. And if humanizing each other, now disruption, if your child is crying, if your cat's jumping on your, your computer while you're supposed to speak, those things will happen if someone is unself-aware. That is a skill that they need to learn and that we need to teach them with. But You know, I work PBS every night with my 86-year-old father, and sometimes their cats are now on virtual video. So I think we're in a new place.
So I saw the question meaning more like,
It's 6 o'clock.
that just, see, I was told to keep time, but I saw the question more as, is disruption really what people want? And it isn't. And so how are we going to make it what people want? And I guess my response to that is, if there's a burning boat, you have to swim. And right now we're all in burning boats. And somebody said earlier in the conference, you know, maybe we'll all go back to normal. We'll all go back to the way it was. I sure hope not. I sure hope that I think the world is going to be blended forever. And I've been a big believer in blended for a decade. And that I really hope that this burning boat at least keeps smoldering, not from the pandemic standpoint, but I mean, keeping us on our toes. You know, if you want to draw back to what everyone here said, having us have feedback, what Eduardo start, making sure we don't let this be an excuse for bad content or not doing things the right way. The advice that Michele gave, and Rhonda, making sure we take care and focus on mindfulness, and Nina, you know, pushing us, right? That we can do this online. It is not true that we can't. And, you know, Yvonne, right? And then Mary, and especially that great quote by Mary said of Nietzsche, even though she's not a fan. So this panel has been, for me, a realm of hope. And you guys, I'm in awe of all of you and what you have done and what you're continuing to do as for your students and for your schools. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lily for the close of this conference.
Thank you very much, Michele, and all of the panelists. Well, it has been a long and full day, and I have learned a tremendous amount about the threats and opportunities of the turn to online legal education, and the need to engage in intentional excavation of the many, many layers of vulnerability that are revealed and have been revealed by operating in a pandemic. I've also learned one underlying recommendation out of many, to think hard about what we would like our post-pandemic pedagogical goals to be, and to identify how those goals should influence both what we think of as best practices in online legal education in the classroom, but also the bigger institutional questions that our panelists have surfaced throughout the day. There have been real differences of opinion on these panels, but that's exactly why we wanted to have this conference in this way. So for all this learning, I would like to thank our wonderful panelists for joining us, and also our wonderful moderators, of course, for joining us. I would like to thank our 950 attendees. It's pretty great. For his leadership and support, I'd like to thank Tony Verona and the rest of his team and many of my colleagues, in fact, all my colleagues, and for their partnership with us. Many, many thanks to Jeremy, Margaret, and the Journal of Legal Education. So that closes the symposium. Thank you very much for participating in it. It's been real, as they say.